My daughter-in-law released my wheelchair brake on the pier. "Goodbye, old hag. The $11 million is ours." She and my son toasted champagne as I rolled toward the edge. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. The October wind off Narragansett Bay was brutal, cutting through my cashmere wrap like it wasn't there. I had suggested this family outing to the Newport pier myself, wanting to believe that Derek and Stephanie had finally warmed to me after years of cold dinners and colder silences. When Stephanie offered to push my wheelchair closer to the water so I could see the sunset better, I thought maybe, just maybe, things were changing. I was right. They were changing. Just not in the way I had hoped. The wheelchair lurched forward when she released the brake. I grabbed the armrests, confused, thinking it was an accident. Then I heard her voice, sharp and clear over the wind. I turned my head and saw them. My son Derek, 44 years old, the boy I had nursed through scarlet fever and sent to Yale and supported through 2 failed business ventures. He was holding a bottle of Moët, pouring champagne into 2 crystal flutes that Stephanie must have brought in her oversized handbag. "The $11 million is ours," she said, raising her glass to him. Derek clinked his glass against hers. "To freedom." The wheelchair hit the edge of the pier. I felt the front wheels tip over the side, felt gravity take hold, felt my body pitch forward into the cold gray water of the bay. The impact knocked the breath out of me. The water was 54 degrees. I knew because I checked the marine forecast every morning, a habit from my competitive days. At that temperature, hypothermia sets in within 15 minutes, death within 45. The wheelchair sank immediately, pulling me down. My legs, weakened by the car accident 2 years ago, couldn't kick free. I fumbled with the seatbelt, the one Stephanie had insisted I wear for safety, and felt the buckle jam. Above me, the surface grew darker as I sank. 10 feet. 15. The pressure built in my ears. My lungs burned. I was going to die, murdered by my own son and his wife for an inheritance they couldn't wait to receive. And then something happened. Something I hadn't felt in decades. 1972, Munich Olympics. I was 22 years old and I had just won gold in the 400-meter freestyle. The crowd was screaming, the water was churning with other swimmers, and all I could think was that I had never felt more alive. More powerful. More myself. 50 years later, sinking in Narragansett Bay with a wheelchair dragging me down, that same feeling surged through me like electricity. I stopped fighting the buckle and went for my coat instead. The cashmere wrap had a small pocket on the inside where I kept my father's old pocket knife, a habit from decades of sailing. I pulled it out, flicked it open, and sliced through the seatbelt in one clean motion. The wheelchair fell away into the darkness below. I kicked upward, my legs screaming with pain, my arms doing most of the work. The old stroke came back to me. Reach, pull, breathe, repeat. 50 years of muscle memory taking over when conscious thought would have killed me. I broke the surface 30 yards from the pier, gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The cold was already numbing my limbs. I had maybe 10 minutes before I lost the ability to move. Derek and Stephanie were still on the pier, still holding their champagne glasses, still toasting my death. They weren't even looking at the water. Why would they? An old woman in a wheelchair, sinking into 54-degree water. There was nothing to see, but there was something to see. Something they had forgotten about. 300 feet above the pier, hovering silently against the gray sky, my drone was recording everything. I had bought the DJI Mavic 3 6 months ago, telling everyone it was for photographing the estate. In reality, I had bought it because I was tired of not knowing what was happening when I wasn't in the room. Too many whispered conversations that stopped when I wheeled in. Too many business calls that Derek took in the garden. Too many glances between him and Stephanie that felt like knives. Today, I had launched the drone before we left for the pier, programming it to follow my phone's GPS and record in 4K. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Derek wouldn't really hurt me, that Stephanie's coldness was just her personality, not malice. I was wrong about all of it. I swam parallel to the shore, staying low in the water, keeping the pier between me and their line of sight. Every stroke was agony. My legs were almost useless. My arms were losing feeling, and the cold was settling into my bones like concrete. But I was Kathleen Mercer. I had swum the English Channel in 1976. I had completed an Ironman triathlon at 55. I had survived a car accident that killed my husband and left me in a wheelchair. I would not die in Narragansett Bay because my son wanted my money. I reached the rocky shore 200 yards from the pier, crawling out of the water on hands and knees like something prehistoric emerging from the deep. My phone was dead. Salt water had killed it instantly, but the drone was still up there, still recording, still capturing Derek and Stephanie as they stood on the pier waiting for the bubbles to stop. I dragged myself behind a boulder and looked back. They were leaving now, walking arm in arm back toward the parking lot. Stephanie was laughing at something Derek said. He tossed the champagne bottle into the water, disposing of evidence probably, though it wouldn't matter. I watched my son disappear around the corner, heading back to his Mercedes, heading back to the life he thought he had just secured for himself. My hands were shaking. From cold, from shock, from rage. I needed to move. I needed shelter, warmth, a phone. I needed to retrieve the drone before it ran out of battery and crashed into the bay. But first, I needed to decide what to do. The obvious answer was to call the police, show them the video, have Derek and Stephanie arrested before they could even file the missing person report. But that felt too easy, too quick. They had planned my murder, maybe for months, maybe for years. They had toasted champagne while I drowned. They had called me old hag and celebrated my death like it was a graduation party. They deserved more than a quick arrest. They deserved to believe they had won. They deserved to celebrate, to plan, to start spending money they thought was theirs. And then they deserved to watch it all collapse. I found a maintenance shed near the shore. The padlock rusted enough that a sharp rock broke it open. Inside was darkness, dust, and a stack of old canvas tarps that smelled like fish and motor oil. I wrapped myself in 3 of them, my body shaking so hard my teeth rattled, and waited for the feeling to return to my limbs. The drone would have landed by now, battery dead, somewhere near the pier. I would retrieve it tomorrow, or send someone to retrieve it, someone I could trust, if such a person existed anymore. I thought about Thomas, Derek's son from his first marriage, 19 years old, a sophomore at Brown, the only person in my family who still looked at me like I was a person instead of an obstacle. He had been living with me for the past year while Derek and Stephanie were renovating their house, a renovation that had somehow required $400,000 of my money. Thomas, my grandson, the only one who might help me, or the one who might betray me to his father. I didn't know anymore. I didn't know anything except that I was alive, and I was cold, and tomorrow my son would report me missing with tears in his eyes and grief in his voice. And I would be watching, recording, waiting. The shed door rattled in the wind. Outside, the sun was setting over Newport, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. A beautiful evening. The kind of evening that should end with family dinners and warm fires and people who loved you. Instead, I sat alone in a fisherman's shed, wrapped in canvas tarps, planning the destruction of my only child. My hand found my coat pocket, searching for the knife I had used to cut myself free. Instead, my fingers touched something else, something small and cold and round. My Olympic medal, the gold from Munich. I had worn it today on a whim, tucked inside my coat like a talisman. 50 years ago, it had represented the best of me. The strongest, fastest, most powerful version of Kathleen Mercer. I held it in my palm, feeling the weight of it, the memory of it. They thought I was weak. They thought the wheelchair meant I was helpless. They thought they could drown me like an unwanted cat and walk away clean. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The metal glinted in the dying light, and I smiled for the first time since hitting the water. I spent the night in that shed, drifting in and out of consciousness, my body fighting hypothermia with everything it had left. By dawn, the shaking had stopped. My core temperature had stabilized. My legs ached with a deep, bone-level pain that reminded me why I was in that wheelchair in the first place. Not weakness, but nerve damage from the accident that killed my husband. The cold water had aggravated it badly, but I was alive, and I had work to do. The beach house was 3 miles south along the coast, the old property my parents had bought in 1958, forgotten by everyone except me. Derek didn't even know it still existed. After my parents died, I had kept paying the property taxes, kept the utilities connected, kept a spare key hidden under the third flagstone on the path. Sentiment, maybe. Or instinct. Now that instinct was saving my life. I walked those 3 miles on legs that screamed with every step, using a piece of driftwood as a cane. The sun was barely up, the beach empty except for seagulls and the occasional jogger in the distance. No one looked twice at the old woman in the wet clothes, limping along the shoreline. Just another eccentric local, probably. The beach house was exactly as I remembered it. Weathered shingles, salt-stained windows, a porch that sagged slightly on the eastern side. I found the key, let myself in, and stood in the musty living room surrounded by furniture that hadn't been touched in 20 years. My parents' wedding photo still hung above the fireplace. My mother's face, young and hopeful. My father's steady gaze. They had loved each other for 57 years, right up until the car accident that took them both on a rainy night in 1994. I wondered what they would think of their grandson now, the boy they had bounced on their knees, taught to fish, sent birthday cards to every year, the man who had just tried to murder their daughter. I pushed the thought away. Grief could wait. Revenge could not. The house had a landline, an old rotary phone that still worked because I had never canceled the service. I picked up the receiver and listened to the dial tone, solid and real. Not the police, not yet. I needed the drone footage first, needed to make sure it had captured everything. I needed to know if Derek and Stephanie had already reported me missing, already started their grieving widow and son act. I needed information, and there was only one person who might give it to me. I dialed Thomas's cell phone from memory. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice groggy. "Hello, Thomas. It's Grandma." Silence. Then carefully, "Grandma Kate? Where are you calling from?" Dad said, "I know what your father said. I need you to listen very carefully and not say anything until I'm finished. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Yes." I told him everything. The wheelchair, the pier, the champagne, the water closing over my head while his father toasted my death. I told him about the drone, about the swim to shore, about the maintenance shed and the walk to the beach house. I told him I was alive and I intended to stay that way, and I needed to know whose side he was on. When I finished, Thomas was quiet for a long time. "I'm coming to you," he said finally. "Don't move. Don't call anyone else. I'll be there in an hour." I sat in my mother's old armchair and waited, watching the dust motes drift through the morning light. Thomas could be calling his father right now. He could be betraying me, handing over my location, sealing my fate. Derek was his father, after all. Blood was supposed to be thicker than water, but Thomas had lived with me for the past year. He had seen how Derek and Stephanie treated me, the dismissiveness, the financial demands, the way they talked about me when they thought I couldn't hear. He had been the one to find me crying in my room after Derek called me a burden at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe blood wasn't thicker than water. Maybe decency was. Thomas arrived in 53 minutes, his Jeep kicking up gravel in the driveway. He came through the door carrying a backpack and a look of controlled fury that reminded me painfully of his grandfather, my late husband, who had worn that same expression when faced with injustice. "Show me," he said. "Show me you're really okay." I stood up, using the arm of the chair for support. My legs wobbled but held. Thomas crossed the room and hugged me, hard, his face buried in my shoulder. I felt wetness through my shirt. Tears, I realized. My 19-year-old grandson was crying. "I knew something was wrong," he said, his voice muffled. "Dad's been acting strange for months. Stephanie, too. All those meetings with lawyers, all those documents they didn't want me to see." He pulled back, wiping his eyes. "I just didn't think. I never imagined. Neither did I." I touched his face, this boy who still had some goodness in him despite his father's influence. "But I need your help now. I need to know what's happening at the house." Thomas opened his backpack and pulled out his laptop. I recorded everything since last night. He had set up his phone to capture audio before leaving for class yesterday morning, hiding it in the living room behind a stack of books. A habit, he explained, that he had developed when he started noticing strange conversations between his father and stepmother. "They reported you missing at 8 p.m. last night," Thomas said, pulling up the recording. "Dad called the Coast Guard, the police, everyone. He was crying. Real tears, Grandma. I almost believed him." He pressed play. Derek's voice filled the room, thick with grief. "My mother. She just rolled off the pier. We tried to grab her, but it happened so fast. The wheelchair just went over. Oh God, she's gone. She's really gone." I listened to my son lie to the authorities with the smooth conviction of a practiced actor. I listened to Stephanie's tearful interjections, her "we did everything we could," and "she seemed so happy today." I listened to the detective asking questions and accepting answers that were pure fabrication. And then I listened to what happened after the police left. Derek's voice, low and satisfied. "That went perfectly. Raymond is already drafting the accelerated probate paperwork." Stephanie's response, "How soon can we access the accounts?" Charles said the will reading is scheduled for Monday. With the death certificate expedited, we could have funds by end of week. And the life insurance? $11 million. Takes a bit longer, but with no body to recover, they'll declare her dead within 30 days. I heard the clink of glasses. Another toast, this time to their success. Thomas stopped the recording. His face was pale. "There's more," he said. "I found something in Dad's office this morning, hidden in his desk." He pulled out a folder, thin, manila, unremarkable. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a copy of my will, marked up with handwritten notes in Derek's writing. Next to the clause about his inheritance, he had written, "Only 40%?" with 3 underlines. The second was a life insurance policy, mine, with Derek listed as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been increased 6 months ago from $2 million to $11 million. The third document made my blood run cold. It was a receipt from a pharmacy in Providence for digoxin, a heart medication I had never been prescribed, purchased 3 months ago, with my name on the label. "They were poisoning me," I said. The words came out flat, emotionless. My body had moved past shock into something colder. Before the pier, they were already trying to kill me. Thomas nodded slowly. "I think the wheelchair thing was plan B, when the poison wasn't working fast enough." I thought about the past 3 months, the dizzy spells, the heart palpitations, the episodes of confusion that my doctor couldn't explain. I had blamed stress, grief, age. I had never considered that my own son was feeding me cardiac medication to simulate a heart attack. "I need the drone footage," I said. "It's still out there, somewhere near the pier. I know where it is." Thomas pulled out his phone and showed me an app, the DJI controller still linked to my drone. "It landed in a tree about a quarter mile from where you went in. Battery's dead, but the footage should still be on the SD card. Can you get it without being seen?" "I can try." He looked at me, his jaw set. "Grandma, what are you going to do? You have to go to the police. You have evidence." "I will go to the police, eventually." I picked up the pharmacy receipt, studying Derek's handwriting on the margin. "But first, I want to give them something to remember." I looked at my grandson, this young man who had chosen me over his father, who was risking everything to help me. "The will reading is Monday," I said. 3 days from now. They'll all be there. Derek, Stephanie, the lawyers, probably a few family friends come to pay their respects." I smiled, and even I knew it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I want to walk into that room while they're dividing up my money. I want to see their faces when they realize I'm not dead." Thomas stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "I'll get the drone," he said. "And Grandma? For what it's worth. I'm glad you can still swim." He left, and I sat alone in the beach house, listening to the waves crash against the shore. In my pocket, my father's knife rested beside my Olympic medal, 2 talismans from 2 different versions of myself. 3 days. I had 3 days to prepare. And when I walked into that boardroom, Derek and Stephanie would finally understand what it meant to cross Kathleen Mercer. Thomas returned that evening with the drone and something else, a small recording device he had worn to dinner with his father and Stephanie. I told them I was too upset to go back to school, he explained, connecting the recorder to his laptop. They bought it. Dad even hugged me and said we'd get through this together. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. I recognized it, the same bitterness I had felt watching my son toast my death. We sat together at the old kitchen table, the drone footage playing on his laptop screen. The image quality was extraordinary. 4K resolution captured every detail. The pier, the wheelchair, Stephanie's hands on the brake, Derek pouring champagne, my body disappearing beneath the gray water, and the audio, clear as a phone call. The $11 million is ours. I watched myself sink and felt nothing. The woman on that screen was already a stranger, a version of Kathleen Mercer who had trusted her son, who had believed that family meant something. That woman was dead, drowned in Narragansett Bay, even if her body had survived. "This is enough," Thomas said. "This is more than enough. We could go to the police right now." "Not yet. Play the dinner recording first." Thomas hesitated, then clicked on the audio file. The sounds of silverware and conversation filled the room. Domestic, normal, the soundtrack of a family meal. "It's such a tragedy," Stephanie was saying. "After everything she survived, to die like this." "At least she didn't suffer," Derek replied. "The water was cold. Hypothermia sets in fast. She probably just fell asleep. We should plan a beautiful memorial." "She would have wanted that." "Absolutely. Something elegant. The yacht club, maybe." They were planning my funeral, choosing catering options and flower arrangements while my body supposedly lay at the bottom of the bay. I listened to them discuss music selections and guest lists, their voices casual, almost cheerful. Then Derek said something that made me pause the recording. "We need to talk to Thomas, make sure he's on board." "On board with what?" Stephanie asked. "The accelerated probate. Mother's lawyer, Whitmore. He'll want to verify everything. If Thomas starts asking questions, starts looking into things." "He's 19. He's grieving. He won't ask questions." "You don't know him like I do. He's always been attached to Mother. Too attached. We need to make sure he doesn't complicate things." I looked at Thomas. His face was rigid, his jaw clenched. "They were going to manipulate you," I said quietly. "Turn you against me, or use you somehow. There's more," Thomas said. He fast-forwarded through the recording, stopping at a point near the end of dinner. "Listen to this." Derek's voice again, lower now. "The life insurance is the priority. $11 million, but the policy has a clause. If there's any suspicion of foul play, they investigate for up to 2 years before paying out." "That's why we needed it to look like an accident," Stephanie said. And it did. The wheelchair, her disability, the pier without railings, it's textbook tragedy. "What about the other attempts?" I sat forward. "Other attempts. Nothing to worry about. The stairs incident was months ago. Everyone forgot about it. The car brake failure would have worked if her husband hadn't been driving instead of her. And the digoxin was never going to show up in an autopsy because she drowned before the cumulative dose could kill her." I stopped breathing. 3 attempts. They had tried to kill me 3 times before the pier. The stairs incident, last March, when I had fallen down the main staircase and broken 2 ribs. I remembered waking up at the bottom, confused, certain I had grabbed the banister. The doctor had said I must have slipped on the runner. The car brake failure, 2 years ago. The accident that killed my husband Robert and put me in this wheelchair. The police had investigated, found nothing conclusive, ruled it an accident. Robert had been driving because I had felt dizzy that morning. Dizzy from the digoxin they were already feeding me. They killed Robert, my husband of 48 years, the man I had built a life with, raised a son with, planned to grow old with. They murdered him trying to murder me. I stood up from the table, knocking my chair backward. My legs gave out and I caught myself on the counter, my whole body shaking. "Grandma!" Thomas reached for me. "They killed your grandfather." My voice came out strangled, barely human. "They murdered him. Robert, my Robert. He died because of them." Thomas was pale, his hands trembling. "I didn't know. I had no idea. Dad always said the accident was that it was random. Nothing was random. Nothing was an accident. I gripped the counter until my knuckles turned white. They've been trying to kill me for 2 years. And they murdered my husband in the process. The room seemed to spin around me. I thought about Robert's funeral, Derek standing beside me, supporting me, playing the devoted son, Stephanie with tears in her eyes, holding my hand, telling me how sorry she was, all of it performance, all of it lies. I had grieved for Robert while his killers lived in my house, ate my food, spent my money, planned my death. The rage that swept through me was unlike anything I had felt before. Not hot and explosive, but cold, Arctic. The kind of cold that could freeze everything it touched. I want them destroyed, I said. Not just arrested. Destroyed. I want them to lose everything. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. I want them to spend the rest of their lives knowing exactly what they did and exactly why they're being punished for it. Thomas nodded slowly. Then we need more than just the drone footage. We need the whole picture. The digoxin purchases, the brake tampering, the stairs, everything tied together so there's no escape, no plea deal, no chance of getting off on a technicality. Can you find that evidence? Maybe. Dad keeps files in his home office. Paper records, not digital. He's paranoid about hackers. Thomas paused, thinking. Stephanie has a private safe in their bedroom, combination lock. I've never seen what's inside, but she checks it every morning like clockwork. What would she keep in a safe? I don't know. But if she's been planning this for years, there has to be documentation somewhere. Plans, receipts, correspondence with whoever tampered with the car brakes. I thought about Stephanie, always so careful, so organized, so meticulous about details. A woman like that wouldn't leave a paper trail, unless she was also planning an exit strategy, unless she needed documentation to protect herself if things went wrong. She's going to turn on Derek, I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. Eventually. She'll have evidence to blame him for everything, make herself look like a victim or a passive participant. Thomas's eyes widened. You think she'd really do that? I think Stephanie only cares about Stephanie. Derek is useful to her right now. But if he becomes a liability, I let the implication hang in the air. So we need to get into that safe before she has a chance to use whatever's in it. Yes, and we need to do it before Monday. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older than 19. I can try to get the combination. She writes things down sometimes. Passwords, codes. There's a notebook in her nightstand. Be careful. If she suspects anything, I know. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Determination, cold and steady. They killed Grandpa Robert. They tried to kill you. I'm not going to let them get away with it. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. This boy, this young man, was the only family I had left, the only person who shared my blood and hadn't tried to spill it. We'll do this together, I said. And when it's over, they'll wish they had let me drown. Thomas left after midnight, taking the drone footage on an encrypted drive and promising to search for more evidence. I stayed in the beach house, unable to sleep, watching the moonlight move across the floor. Robert's face kept appearing in my mind, his smile on our wedding day, his steady hands teaching Derek to fish, his voice, warm and reassuring, telling me everything would be all right. Everything was not all right. Everything had been broken for years, and I had been too blind or too hopeful to see it. But I saw it now. I saw everything. And in 2 days, Derek and Stephanie would see it too. I walked to the window and looked out at the ocean, black and vast under the stars. Somewhere out there, my wheelchair was still sinking, settling into the sand and silt of Narragansett Bay, a marker of the woman they thought they had killed. I wondered when Derek had stopped loving me, if he ever had. I remembered him as a child, sweet, eager to please, always bringing me drawings from school. Look, Mommy, I made this for you. Crayon suns and stick figures holding hands. A little boy who wanted nothing more than his mother's approval. What had changed? When had that boy become a man who could calmly pour champagne while watching me drown? The answer, I realized, was probably Stephanie. She had entered our lives 10 years ago, all charm and sophistication, sweeping Derek off his feet. I had been happy for him then. His first marriage had been a disaster, and he deserved someone who seemed to genuinely care. But looking back now, I could see the pattern. The way she isolated him from old friends, the way she encouraged his resentments, validated his complaints, slowly turned him against anyone who might challenge her influence, including me. She was the architect. Derek was the tool. Together, they had murdered my husband and tried to murder me. The thought should have broken me. Instead, it sharpened me. Every memory of their cruelty, every piece of evidence Thomas had uncovered, every lie they had told, it all became fuel for the fire burning inside me. I was 72 years old. I had survived more than most people could imagine, and I was not going to let my son and his wife be the thing that finally destroyed me. I touched the cold glass of the window, watching my breath fog the surface. Monday was coming. The will reading, the confrontation. I turned away from the window and began to plan. The next 36 hours were a masterclass in preparation. Thomas returned Sunday morning with 3 things: the combination to Stephanie's safe, a folder of documents from Derek's home office, and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. "I found the notebook," he said, spreading papers across the beach house table. "She keeps everything coded, but not coded enough." The safe combination was listed under Gym Locker, 234567. "And these?" I picked up a stack of printed emails, scanning the contents. "From Dad's filing cabinet. He labels everything by year." I pulled 2022 through 2024. Thomas paused, his expression grim. "Grandma, it's worse than we thought." I had already survived drowning. I had already learned my son was a murderer. I didn't know how it could be worse, but I braced myself anyway. The documents told a story that stretched back 3 years. Bank transfers to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, $47,000 in total, paid in increments to avoid reporting requirements. Email correspondence with someone identified only as MR, discussing the vehicle situation and alternative approaches when the primary method fails. MR had tampered with Robert's brakes. MR had received $15,000 for the job. My husband's life had been worth $15,000 to my son. I set the papers down carefully, afraid that if I held them any longer, I would tear them to pieces. What else? Pharmacy records. Stephanie filled prescriptions for digoxin at 3 different pharmacies over 18 months, using your name and insurance but shipping to a P.O. box. Thomas pulled out another sheet. "And there's this." It was a handwritten note, Stephanie's precise cursive unmistakable. Phase 3 contingency. If direct methods continue to fail, arrange incident during travel. Greece trip, September. Research local emergency response times. Consider altitude options. Santorini cliffs. They had planned to push me off a cliff in Greece. The trip Derek had been encouraging me to take for my health. "I found more in the safe," Thomas continued. "A burner phone with text messages, coded, but clearly about you. A second life insurance policy she took out 2 years ago without Dad knowing, naming herself as beneficiary. And this." He handed me a small black notebook, leather-bound, filled with meticulous handwriting. It was Stephanie's insurance policy, not the financial kind, the evidence kind. Every communication with MR documented, every payment recorded, every failed attempt analyzed with clinical detachment, including notes on Derek's involvement. "She's been building a case against him," I said slowly. "From the beginning. If things went wrong, she was going to blame everything on Dad, make herself look like a victim who was coerced." Thomas's voice was bitter. "She probably planned to inherit everything and then divorce him. Or worse." The scope of Stephanie's manipulation took my breath away. She hadn't just been Derek's partner in crime. She had been playing him from the start, positioning herself as the survivor no matter how events unfolded. My son, for all his cruelty, was as much a pawn as a perpetrator. It didn't make me forgive him, but it added another layer to my rage. "We have everything we need," I said. "The drone footage, the audio recordings, the financial documents, Stephanie's notebook. It's enough to destroy them both." "So what's the plan? Go to the police?" I had been thinking about this all night. The police were necessary, eventually. But I wanted more than legal consequences. I wanted them to feel, even for a moment, what they had put me through. The betrayal, the fear, the helplessness of watching your life slip away. "The will reading is tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I said. "Harold Whitmore's office on Bellevue Avenue. Derek and Stephanie will be there, expecting to hear how much money they've inherited." Instead, I walk through the door. Thomas stared at me. "You're going to confront them? In person?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they gave me. The experience of watching everything they planned fall apart. The feeling of being trapped with no escape." I smiled, and it felt cold on my face. "Harold doesn't know I'm alive. No one does except you. When I appear at that reading, Derek and Stephanie will have approximately 30 seconds to decide what to do. Confess? Attack? Whatever they choose, they lose. What if they try something? What if they're dangerous? That's why you'll be there first. Hidden, recording everything." I gestured to the documents spread across the table. "And before I walk in, we're going to send copies of all this evidence to 3 people: Harold Whitmore, the Newport Police Department, and my contact at the Providence Journal." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he nodded slowly. "So even if something goes wrong at the confrontation, the truth is already out. The investigation starts whether I'm alive or dead. They can't stop it by silencing me." I reached across the table and gripped his hand. "This isn't about revenge, Thomas. It's about making sure they can never hurt anyone else. Making sure they spend the rest of their lives paying for what they did." "It feels like revenge," Thomas said quietly. "Maybe it is. Maybe I've earned that." We spent the rest of the day preparing. Thomas made 3 copies of every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. We drafted a letter to Harold Whitmore explaining what had happened: the murder attempts, the evidence, my survival, with instructions to open it only if I failed to appear at the will reading alive and unharmed. The letter to the police was more detailed: names, dates, locations, the brake tampering, the digoxin, the pier, everything laid out in chronological order with supporting documentation. The journalist was a woman I had known for 30 years, Margaret Chen, now a senior investigative reporter. We had been on the Olympic team together in 1972, though she swam relay while I did individual events. I trusted her completely. "If anything happens to me tomorrow," I told Thomas, "Margaret will make sure this story reaches every newspaper in the country. Derek and Stephanie won't be able to buy their way out of headlines." By Sunday evening, everything was in place. The evidence packages were sealed and addressed. The plans were memorized. Thomas had scouted Harold's office building and found an empty conference room where he could hide with his recording equipment. I stood at the beach house window, watching the sunset over Narragansett Bay. The same water that had nearly killed me 48 hours ago was now painted gold and crimson, beautiful in the dying light. Tomorrow, I would stop being dead. Tomorrow, Derek and Stephanie would learn what it felt like to lose everything. I thought about Robert, his gentle hands, his patient smile, the way he used to make coffee just the way I liked it without ever being asked. We had planned to spend our final years traveling, enjoying grandchildren, watching sunsets exactly like this one. They had stolen that from us, from him. He had died thinking it was an accident, never knowing his own son had killed him. I pressed my palm against the cold glass and made a silent promise. "Tomorrow, Robert. Tomorrow they pay." I slept better that night than I had in years. The nightmares that had plagued me since Robert's death were gone, replaced by dreams of water and swimming. Not drowning, but gliding, powerful and free. I dreamed of standing at the edge of the Olympic pool in Munich, 1972. The crowd roaring, the water calling. My body coiled and ready. Gold had waited for me at the end of that race. I had known it with absolute certainty before I even dove in. I had that same certainty now. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, October settling into Newport with a vengeance. Thomas picked me up at 11, and we went over the plan one final time. The evidence packages? Already delivered. Whitmore's office received theirs at 9. The police package goes out at 2:45, 15 minutes before the reading starts. Margaret gets hers at 3 sharp, timed with an email explaining everything. The conference room? I'll be there by 2. Recording equipment is already set up. The door has a frosted glass panel. I can see into the hallway without being seen. And if something goes wrong? I call 911 and release everything to Margaret immediately. Thomas met my eyes. But nothing's going to go wrong. You've planned this perfectly. I wished I shared his confidence. Derek and Stephanie had proven themselves capable of murder. Cornered animals were dangerous, and they were about to be very cornered indeed. One more thing, Thomas said, pulling a small device from his pocket. I bought this yesterday. It's a personal alarm. Pull the pin and it emits a 130 decibel siren. Keep it in your pocket. If they try anything, use it. I took the device, touched by his thoughtfulness. When did you become so prepared? When someone tried to kill my grandmother? His expression was fierce, protective. They're not getting another chance. We drove to Newport in silence, watching the familiar landscape pass. The mansions on Bellevue Avenue, monuments to old money and older secrets. The harbor where sailing ships bobbed in the gray chop. The streets where I had walked with Robert, planning our future. All of it looked different now, smaller, less permanent, as if the scales had fallen from my eyes and I could finally see the fragility beneath the surface of everything. At 2:30, Thomas dropped me at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Harold's office. We embraced in the car, a fierce hug that said everything words couldn't. I'll see you in there, he said. I watched him drive away, then walked into the coffee shop and ordered tea I didn't want. 25 minutes until the reading. 25 minutes until I rose from the dead. The tea grew cold in my hands while I sat by the window, watching the street. At 2:55, I saw Derek's car pull into the parking lot across the street. Stephanie emerged first, immaculate in black. Mourning clothes, I realized with disgust. They were wearing mourning clothes to collect their inheritance. Derek followed, his expression somber, his movements careful, playing the grieving son to perfection. He held Stephanie's hand as they walked toward the building, a united front of performed tragedy. I waited until they disappeared inside. Then I stood, left my untouched tea on the table, and stepped out into the cold October air. The walk to Harold's office took 3 minutes. Each step felt deliberate, powerful, like approaching the starting blocks before a race. I thought of Robert one final time, his face, his voice, his love. Then I pushed open the door and went inside to meet my killers. Harold Whitmore's waiting room was exactly as I remembered it. Mahogany paneling, brass fixtures, portraits of dead partners staring down from the walls. Old money aesthetic for old money clients. I had been here dozens of times over the years for estate planning, trust modifications, the endless paperwork of wealth. The receptionist looked up as I entered, then looked again. Her face went pale. Mrs. Mercer? Her voice cracked on my name. But we were told that I was dead. I walked past her desk toward the conference room. I'm afraid the reports were somewhat exaggerated. The door to Harold's private conference room was closed. I could hear voices inside. Harold's measured legal tone, Derek's practiced grief. They were already seated, already waiting to divide up my life. The door swung open to reveal a tableau that would stay with me forever. Harold at the head of the long table, reading glasses perched on his nose, a thick folder open before him. Derek and Stephanie on one side, hands clasped, expressions arranged in careful sorrow. Thomas, my Thomas, seated across from them, playing his part perfectly. 4 faces turned toward me. 3 of them went white. Kathleen! Harold rose to his feet, knocking over his water glass. My God. We thought. The police told us. Good afternoon, Harold. I walked into the room and closed the door behind me. I apologize for the disruption. I understand you were about to read my will. Derek hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. He sat frozen in his chair like a man watching his own execution, every drop of color drained from his face. Beside him, Stephanie's composure cracked for just an instant, a flash of something raw and ugly beneath the polished surface, before she recovered. Mother! Derek's voice came out strangled. How? We saw the wheelchair. Went into the water, yes, with me in it. I pulled out a chair at the head of the table, directly opposite Harold, and sat down. Fortunately, I've always been a strong swimmer. Did you forget that, Derek? I won gold in Munich. 200-meter freestyle. The water has never been able to kill me. Stephanie's hand tightened on Derek's arm. A warning grip. A command to stay silent. This is extraordinary, Harold said, still standing, still staring. Mrs. Mercer, we need to call the police immediately. You were reported missing, presumed drowned. There's an ongoing investigation. The police already have everything they need. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, screen up. As of 15 minutes ago, the Newport Police Department received a detailed package documenting 3 separate attempts on my life over the past 2 years. The brake tampering that killed my husband Robert, the digoxin that was being fed to me in my food, and the wheelchair incident 3 days ago, which was captured in remarkable detail by my grandson's drone. Derek made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a sob, something broken and animal. You should watch the footage, I continued, keeping my voice steady. The resolution is excellent. You can see everything quite clearly. The pier, the wheelchair, Stephanie's hands on the brake, the champagne toast afterward. I paused. You really shouldn't have said, "Goodbye, old hag," within range of a 4K microphone. Stephanie moved first. She released Derek's arm and leaned forward, her expression shifting from shock to calculation. I could almost see her mind working, sorting through options, looking for an escape route. This is obviously a misunderstanding, she said. Whatever you think you saw, I saw you try to kill me. I cut her off without raising my voice. I saw you push my wheelchair off a pier and watch me drown. I heard you toast my death with champagne. I have it all recorded, Stephanie. Every word, every frame. Recording without consent is illegal in Rhode Island, Stephanie said smoothly. None of that would be admissible. In criminal court, perhaps. But the police have more than just the video. I smiled, and it felt like baring teeth. They have the pharmacy records showing you purchased digoxin under my name. They have the bank transfers to the man who tampered with Robert's brakes. They have your notebook, the one from your safe, with the combination you so helpfully recorded as gym locker. The color drained from Stephanie's face. Oh yes, I continued. I particularly enjoyed your contingency plans. Arrange incident during travel. Greece trip, September? Research local emergency response times. You were going to push me off a cliff in Santorini. How romantic. You broke into our house. Stephanie's voice was ice. You stole private property. That's burglary. Thomas has a key. Family homes, family access. And the documents were evidence of multiple felonies, which creates rather different legal considerations. I turned to Derek, who still hadn't spoken since his strangled utterance of mother. Don't you have anything to say? He stared at me with hollow eyes. The devoted sun mask had crumbled completely, leaving something raw and pitiful behind. I never wanted. It was supposed to be, you killed your father. My voice cracked on the words despite my determination to stay controlled. Robert, the man who taught you to ride a bicycle, who cheered at every Little League game, who paid for your education, your wedding, your house. You murdered him. I didn't mean, the brakes were supposed to. Derek's voice broke. You were supposed to be driving that day, not Dad. It was never supposed to be Dad. The confession hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. I heard Harold's sharp intake of breath. Thomas had his phone out, recording everything. Stephanie's hand moved toward her purse. Don't. Thomas's voice cut across the room. Whatever you're reaching for, don't. Stephanie froze, her hand still hovering. I'm just getting my phone, she said. To call our lawyer. Leave it. Thomas stood, moving around the table to position himself between Stephanie and the door. The police are already on their way. Harold's receptionist has been instructed to call 911 if we're not out of this room in 30 minutes. I hadn't known that part. Thomas had added his own preparations. Smart boy. This is insane. Stephanie's composure finally shattered. She turned on Derek, her voice venomous. I told you we should have been more careful. I told you the digoxin was taking too long, but you insisted on waiting, on being patient. Stephanie, don't. Derek reached for her arm. She slapped his hand away. Don't touch me. This is your fault. Your mother, your plan, your incompetence. I was just trying to help you get what you deserved. My incompetence. Derek's voice rose. You're the one who insisted on the pier. You're the one who said drowning would look natural. You're the one who… Both of you, stop. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. I'm not interested in watching you tear each other apart. That's what the prosecutors will do. The room fell silent. Stephanie and Derek stared at each other with undisguised hatred, their partnership dissolving before my eyes. Whatever bond had held them together, greed, shared secrets, mutual manipulation, it was gone now. Harold finally found his voice. Mrs. Mercer, I have to ask, what do you want to happen here? I want them arrested, tried, and convicted of murder and attempted murder. I want every penny they've stolen returned to my estate. I want the world to know what they did. To Robert, to me, to this family. I looked at Derek, searching for some trace of the boy I had raised. And I want to understand. Not forgiveness. That's impossible. But understanding. Why? Derek looked at Stephanie, then at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not remorse, exactly, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. You never saw me, he said quietly. My whole life. It was always Robert, always Thomas, always your charity work, and your swimming trophies, and your perfect Newport life. I was just there. Background. The disappointing son who couldn't live up to the Mercer name. It is true. His voice hardened. Every family dinner you found something to criticize. Every choice I made was wrong. When I married Christine, you disapproved. When I divorced her, you disapproved more. When I met Stephanie, he laughed bitterly. You never gave her a chance. Never accepted her. Just like you never really accepted me. I wanted to argue. Wanted to list the ways I had loved him, supported him, tried to connect with him, but the words died in my throat because part of what he said was true. I had been critical. I had been disappointed. I had compared him unfavorably to Robert, to Thomas, to the idea of the son I had wanted him to be. That didn't justify murder. Nothing justified murder. But it explained something about the darkness that had grown in him, nurtured by Stephanie's manipulation until it became capable of monstrous things. So you killed your father, I said, because you felt unloved. I killed him by accident, Derek said. You were supposed to be driving, and then, once it was done, Stephanie said we couldn't stop, said if you died of natural causes within a few years, it would all be worth it. The money, the freedom, a new life. A new life built on my corpse. Derek said nothing. There was nothing to say. The sound of sirens cut through the afternoon quiet, distant but approaching. Stephanie's head whipped toward the window, her survival instincts engaging. This isn't over, she said, grabbing her purse. I have a lawyer. I have rights. You can't leave. Thomas blocked the door. The police are coming. Running will only make it worse. Stephanie's eyes went cold. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister. Pepper spray, I realized too late. Thomas barely got his arm up in time. The spray hit his sleeve, not his face, but he staggered backward. Stephanie bolted for the door, yanking it open, and ran directly into 2 Newport police officers. I heard her screaming as they took her down. Accusations, threats, promises of lawsuits. Derek didn't move from his chair. He sat perfectly still as a 3rd officer entered the room, read him his rights, and helped him to his feet. Mother, he said as they led him past me. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. It's not worth much, I said. But thank you for saying it. The officers escorted them out. Harold stood frozen by the window, legal documents scattered across the table, his orderly world shattered. Thomas wiped pepper spray residue from his sleeve, his eyes watering. It's over, I said quietly. Is it? Thomas looked at me. The trials haven't even started. But the hard part is over. The truth is out. I walked to the window and watched the police cars in the parking lot below, Derek and Stephanie being loaded into separate vehicles. Everything else is just paperwork. Thomas came to stand beside me. What now? I watched my son disappear into a police car, his head bowed, his hands cuffed behind his back. The boy who had brought me crayon drawings, the man who had tried to kill me. Now, I said, I start living again. The trials dominated Rhode Island news for 6 months. Stephanie broke first, as I had predicted. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the drone footage, the pharmacy records, the bank transfers, her own meticulous notebook, she turned state's witness against Derek in exchange for a reduced sentence. The immunity deal fell apart when prosecutors discovered the extent of her involvement, but by then she had already testified to everything. Her own words sealed her fate alongside his. Derek never testified. His lawyer advised silence, and for once in his life, my son listened to someone other than Stephanie. He sat through the proceedings with the same hollow expression I had seen in Harold's conference room, a man who had already accepted his fate. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder for Robert. Conspiracy to commit murder. Attempted murder. Insurance fraud. A litany of charges that would ensure neither of them ever walked free again. Derek received life without parole. Stephanie got 45 years. She would be 84 before her first parole hearing. The judge called it one of the most calculated, cold-blooded crimes he had seen in 30 years on the bench. I attended every day of the trial, sat in the front row of the gallery, watched witnesses describe Robert's death, my near drowning, the methodical planning that had gone into destroying our family. I wanted them to see me, alive, unbroken, refusing to look away from what they had done. On sentencing day, Derek met my eyes for the last time. I don't know what he expected to see there. Forgiveness, perhaps, or grief, or the maternal love he had exploited for so long. What he saw instead was nothing at all. I had excised him from my heart like the cancer he was. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals can never be forgiven. My son had murdered my husband and tried to murder me, and no amount of understanding or closure could change that fundamental horror. All I could do was accept it, survive it, and build something meaningful from the wreckage. The life insurance company paid out eventually. Not the $11 million Derek had expected, but a smaller sum from Robert's existing policies. Combined with my investments and the assets I had protected through careful estate planning, I had more than enough to live comfortably. More importantly, I had enough to do some good. The first thing I did was establish a scholarship fund at Newport Academy in Robert's name. 4 full rides every year for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, kids who had the potential but not the resources to pursue their dreams. Robert had always believed in education as the great equalizer. This felt like a fitting tribute. The second thing was more personal. I hired a private investigator to track down the victims of MR, the mechanic Stephanie had paid to tamper with Robert's brakes. The man was already in prison for another crime, but I learned he had done similar work before. 3 other families had lost loved ones to accidents he had engineered. I found them. I told them the truth, and I helped them pursue their own cases against the people who had hired him. It cost me nearly $200,000 in legal fees and investigative work. I considered it the best money I ever spent. Thomas graduated from Brown that spring, magna cum laude, with a degree in criminal justice. He had changed his major after everything happened, said he wanted to understand how people like his father and Stephanie could exist, and how the system could be improved to catch them sooner. I was proud of him in a way I had never been proud of Derek. Thomas had been tested by betrayal and chosen courage. He had stood by me when the world thought I was dead. He had risked everything to help me survive. "What are you going to do now?" he asked me at his graduation dinner. We sat on the patio of a restaurant overlooking the harbor, the same water that had almost killed me now sparkling peacefully in the June sunlight. "I'm going to swim," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You haven't been in the water since—" "I know. That's why it's time." I sipped my wine, watching the sailboats glide across the bay. I spent 50 years defining myself by that Olympic medal. Then I spent 2 years being slowly poisoned and manipulated. Then I almost drowned. I set down my glass. I need to reclaim the water, make it mine again. The next morning, I drove to Newport's public beach at dawn. The air was cool, the sand still cold, the water a gray mirror reflecting the early sky. I hadn't worn a swimsuit since before the accident. Hadn't trusted my body in the water since Derek pushed me off that pier, but I was still a swimmer. That hadn't changed. Couldn't change. It was as fundamental to my identity as breathing. I waded in slowly, feeling the cold embrace of Narragansett Bay, the same water that had witnessed my attempted murder, the same water where my wheelchair still rested, somewhere in the silt and darkness. For a moment, the panic returned, the memory of sinking, of fighting, of my lungs burning for air. I felt the phantom weight of the chair dragging me down, the cold seeping into my bones, the certainty that I was going to die. Then I pushed off and began to swim. My strokes were rusty at first. Years of wheelchair dependence had weakened muscles that used to carry me to gold. But the muscle memory remained. The rhythm returned. Push, pull, breathe. Push, pull, breathe. The water parted around me like an old friend welcoming me home. I swam until the beach was far behind me. Swam until my arms burned and my lungs ached. Swam until I was crying without knowing why. Grief and relief and rage and joy all tangled together, pouring out of me with every stroke. When I finally stopped, treading water in the middle of the bay, I was sobbing. Great heaving sobs that shook my whole body, that echoed across the empty water. I cried for Robert, who deserved better than a son who murdered him. I cried for Derek, the little boy he had been before something twisted inside him. I cried for myself, for the years of slow poisoning I had survived without knowing it. And when the tears were done, I floated on my back and looked up at the sky, vast and blue and indifferent to human tragedy. And I felt, for the first time in years, at peace. I started swimming every day after that. Hired a physical therapist to help rebuild my strength. Within 3 months, I was swimming a mile without stopping. Within 6, I entered a seniors competition and won my age group. The medal hung on my wall next to the one from Munich. Different accomplishments, different meaning. The first represented potential fulfilled. The second represented something harder. Survival, resilience, the refusal to let anyone steal my joy. I never rebuilt the beach house. Too many memories. Too much pain. Instead, I renovated my main house, the one Derek had tried to steal, and filled it with new purpose. I hosted fundraisers for victim advocacy organizations. I mentored young swimmers at the local club. I wrote letters to other survivors of family violence, sharing my story, reminding them they were not alone. The money I kept served me well. I traveled, not to Greece, as Derek had murderously planned, but to places I had always wanted to see: Japan during cherry blossom season, the northern lights in Iceland, a quiet beach in Portugal where I swam in the Atlantic and thought of nothing at all. I was 73 years old. I had survived attempts on my life by my own son. I had lost my husband to murder and my faith in family to betrayal, and yet I was happy. Not the naive happiness of before, built on trust that would be shattered, something harder, more deliberate, happiness as a choice, as an act of defiance against everyone who had wanted to take it from me. On the first anniversary of the verdict, I returned to the pier where it had all happened. Someone had installed safety railings now, perhaps inspired by the news coverage of my case. A small plaque marked the spot, though it didn't mention my name. Just a warning about water safety, about the dangers of the bay. I stood at the railing and looked out at the gray water where I had almost died. "I'm still here," I said quietly. To no one. To everyone. To the ghost of the woman I had been before I learned what my son was capable of. A gull cried overhead. The waves lapped against the pilings. Somewhere behind me, tourists laughed and seagulls squabbled over scraps. I pulled out the letter I had been carrying for weeks. The only communication Derek had sent since his conviction. I hadn't opened it, hadn't decided if I ever would. I held it over the railing for a long moment. Then I let it fall. The water swallowed it in seconds. Derek's words, whatever they were, apologies, explanations, more manipulation, sank into the bay alongside the wheelchair that had failed to kill me. I turned away from the pier and walked back toward land. I had a swimming lesson to teach, a charity gala to plan, a life to live, The water couldn't kill me, neither could my son. I was Kathleen Mercer, Olympic champion, survivor, grandmother. I had faced the worst that family could do and come out the other side, and I was just getting started.